So hello, beautiful readers and writers, and welcome to today's live stream about how to write your life story. So this is something that a lot of people come to me about when they join my group. And it's often because people have heard their life story and said to them, you know, oh my God, you should write a book. Now, to be honest, it's normally well-meaning family and friends who love you. They're inspired by you. They love what you've done. But the advice on you should write a book is a little easy to give when they're not going to put in months and months of work of writing, the money into editing, getting book covers designed, published, all of those things. So I want to talk about that today, and if writing a memoir or your life story is actually the best move for you at this time. So why do you want to write a life story is the thing I ask people when they come to me. So what's your objective and what do you hope to get out of it? Because if it's just to share your story to help others, oh, it just occurred to me that maybe you can't actually hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me or not at the moment? This is a little bit of a pain. I hate this OBS software thing. You can't really see what's happening. I don't know if I'm going to keep using it. So yes, so give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. But yes, if you want to write your life story, I always ask why. Because, oh, thank you for that. Because if you just want to do it to help people, you've got a long journey ahead of you with time, effort, money, things like that you're going to spend, and you need to make sure it's the right decision. So in essence, if you don't have a business where the book is related to and naturally aligns with, then it might not really make sense for you to write. So I'll give you an example. If you're a weight loss coach, for example, and you want to tell your story about your weight loss journey and how you yo-yo dieted, and basically what the epiphany was that you finally realized what the secret was to keeping the weight off. And that led you into studying coaching, and that led you into weight loss coaching, right, for example. So your story would be about your journey on how you got to where you are. Now, your potential clients, when you market this book, your potential clients can read that and get to know you. And from there, they know you, or they feel like they know you, they like you, they've resonated with your story, they're aligned with you, you're just like them, that sort of thing. That's a perfect soft entry for them into working with you. And at the end of the book, you might say, this is how you work with me. The other thing is about doing it that way is that if your weight loss coaching is $4,000 or $5,000, you might have spent $4,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 on doing a really, really great book and maybe promoting it. And that means all you need is 2 clients and you make that money back. Anything on top of that is gravy. But if, for example, you don't have a business and you've spent $5,000, how are you going to make that money back? So this is one of the things about when it might not be a good idea. If you don't have a business, how are you going to make that money back, and how are you going to promote it, and how are you going to keep funding doing all of that? Because book sales, I'm sad to say, are never going to make you rich. What's his name? Reed Tracy from Hay House said that none of his authors actually make a living from their book, and that they had one author, their runaway success author, had sold 250,000 books in a 3-year period. Now that's a decent amount. They might have been making $1 or $2 a book, but they were the runaway success author. Most people make less than 30 grand a year from their book when they're constantly promoting it, like constantly. So if you don't have a business, how will you keep funding the sale of the book? So, if you're only making it depends how what your cover price is and what platform you've got it out there on, but you might be making anywhere from 30 cents through to, $3, $4, $5 for your book. If you're not known, you can't really charge a lot for your book. So if you're only making a little bit, keep in mind the only way to sell your book and to keep it in front of people's eyes is to run ads, Amazon ads, that sort of thing. I'm not talking about Facebook ads, I'm talking about Amazon ads. When people get to the ad, they really need to be seeing reviews, at least a dozen reviews. Ideally you want like 100 reviews, but getting reviews is a whole process on its own. So you've got to keep this in mind if you want to write a memoir. How are you going to get the book out there and get it seen and get it sold? Because if you don't have that high ticket coaching to sell off the back of it, where's the money going to come from? And I don't want to dissuade anyone from writing a memoir. I guess I just want to keep it real that you have to keep this in mind. Now, I'm not seeing any comments come up here, which is a bit of a worry. But again, it's this stupid software so can someone write a comment so that I can see if I'm actually seeing anything? Because I really don't think I am. So I will have to check on my phone shortly. So keeping that in mind, the other thing is there is an exception to this, okay? Now, I have had a client who wrote a memoir as a cathartic process, okay? So there was a thing she wanted to write about in her life, and she felt like it was like in here, you know, it was like holding, she was a creative person, and she felt like this story, which was, you know, like a serious situation she wanted to talk about. She felt like it was right down here, and that the other projects were kind of underneath it, and she needed to write this story and tell her truth about this situation in order for the other things to be able to come out. Now, she in fact may not want anyone to ever read this book. She doesn't want to publish it. Well, she doesn't feel that she wants to publish it at this stage, but the book was a cathartic process, okay, to help her. She had therapy. It's not, writing a book is not therapy, and I have to warn you that if you haven't had therapy about something very impactful, writing a book can bring out the feelings, and that may not be a good idea. So if you have had a thing that has happened, I do encourage you to get therapy about that before you go writing a book. So writing a book is when you've come out the other side, you know. So she wrote it as a cathartic process. If that is your aim, then I fully support that. And obviously it just means that you're maintaining your expectations in terms of getting it published, making money, and all of that sort of thing. So that is like the exception. But if your idea is you're going to write it and suddenly it's going to make you thousands or millions of dollars, just calm your farm. If you want your book to get made into a movie, then, you know, that would be great, but kind of need to probably put a lid on that one a little bit as well. That might happen, you know, to 1 in a million people. In terms of getting published, I did do a post on that a couple of weeks ago, as well as an interview. So check out my page to watch an interview with an ex-literary agent and publishing mentor about that. But in terms of getting published, getting your memoir published, look, it is possible sometimes. It's uber competitive, like literally 1 in a million publishers get tens of thousands of submissions. Something to keep in mind is that they say stories about death are overdone, travel memoirs are overdone. You know, the regular type of life traumas, although they are important to you and they are important in terms of being published, they really want something new and different. You know, we've seen some amazing memoirs in the last few years. You know, Turia Pitt's memoir about her incredible journey with, you know, the running and the burns and all of that, and her survival and her thriving actually is really inspirational. I Am Malala, the young girl who was shot in the face by the Taliban. I mean, these are the types of stories that now are, you know, being published. But again, I'm just going to check my phone to see, because I'm not getting any messages whatsoever up on the window here, so something's a bit going wrong there. But those are the types of stories that are now getting published. Your regular run-of-the-mill, any kind of hardship, you know, divorce, even really serious things like, you know, violence, etc. Those are serious and important, but these aren't the kind of things that are getting published. So if that doesn't put you off, good, let's keep going. How much of your life to cover? Now, this is kind of a hard one, because obviously if you tried to cover your whole life, you'd have, you know, War and Peace ×2, okay? The older you are, the more you'd have to write. So when you're writing your life story, think about the theme or message you're trying to get across. So if, for example, you are a weight loss coach, it's really your journey started when you first started dieting, or when someone first told you you were overweight, for example. So your story would kind of start at that point. okay? And it would go through to maybe the point at which you became a coach, sort of thing. And that's how much you're covering. So think about the theme or message of your story, and that's when you're starting and stopping. So the other thing I like to do is drop the reader into the action. So how do you do that? I like to do a prologue. So in your prologue is where you drop the reader right into it, because you want to grab that reader from page one. When I wrote my novel, and I'm going to talk about novel style and style in a minute, but when I wrote my novel, the first 2 chapters were sort of setting up the story, you know, before the character went on to work on the cruise ship. When I went to my editor, she actually deleted the first 2 chapters completely, and we started at chapter 3, basically, because she said all of that backstory shit, it's boring. Like, it's essential in a way, but it's boring, and it's not as essential as you think it is in terms of having it up front. What you do is drop the reader into the action, and then as you go through the story, you bring little bits of the past and you sort of feed them in here and there where they're relevant. So that's what I like you to do in your memoir. So the point I like to pick for that pivotal, for that prologue, is your pivotal moment. So that's the point at which everything went to shit, or it's the point where everything went to shit and you realized you'd had enough and you needed to change, or it's the point where everything changed and things were amazing, or it's kind of that turning point where you sort of said, you know, this is what I'm doing now. Like, you know, like that pivotal kind of moment. That's what I like to see in your prologue, because that way your reader's like, oh my God, and they want straight away to know how you got there or how you got out of that thing, or, you know, whatever. Then in chapter 1, you go back to the beginning. Now, what I don't want to see in the beginning is, I was born in 1975 and I had 4, you know, with 4 brothers and a sister, and my parents were middle class and all that shit, right? So boring. Start at the beginning of the journey. So as I mentioned, if you're a weight loss coach, start when someone first told you were overweight, or when you first went on a diet, and then you go from there. If you are, you know, a book writing coach like me, maybe I would talk about, and I'm not going to write a memoir right now, but maybe I would talk about, you know, the first time I got an A on my English essay or something like that. So something that kind of sparked the journey that is the message of the book. That's where you would start in your chapter 1. Now, in terms of writing style, I love what you call creative nonfiction. So this is nonfiction written in the style of a novel. So you're using like dialogue, description, action, internal dialogue, you know, narrative, which is sort of telling, which you're going to go into in a second, and you're mixing up these styles to tell a really beautiful story, like a novel, that your reader will get really engaged into. And it's a much more engaging way of writing. The common mistake I see people make all the time when writing their memoir is writing in like journal style. So that's like you would write in your journal. And it's, you know, when you're just explaining what's happened and what they call telling instead of showing. So I'm going to read some examples to you to make it really clear. But writing that way also, like it's called narrative summary, is just when you're telling a story. It's quite removed and your reader doesn't get engaged. It's so boring. Blogs are often written like this, and look, for a blog post it might be fine, but if you're reading pages and pages and pages of narrative summary, it's super boring. So I'm just going to give you an example. I turned off the Wi-Fi on my phone because last week I ended up having double audio and I don't really know why. So, all right, I'm going to give you an example of telling, okay? Now, this is something, I just wrote a blog and I'm going to put the blog post link into the comments so that you can get that. But in my blog, I explain all of this in detail. Okay, so telling. Jake was always so annoying and paranoid. We were driving home from the party and he was really quiet and obviously angry at me, but I didn't know why. When I asked him what was wrong, he started going on and on about me supposedly flirting with some old guy who had accosted me at the bar. He was being completely ridiculous because I'd spent the whole time trying to get away from the guy who had smelled a bit like cabbage, to be honest. In the end, it turned into a big argument about how I never stand with him at parties and he feels like a gooseberry. When we got home, Jake jumped out of the car angrily and said that he doesn't know if we should be together anymore. Now, that's what you call journal style or telling, right? Or narrative summary. It's like This is what happened, blah, 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 blah. And look, and it's probably how you would tell your friend over a glass of wine, right? But to be honest, it's boring. It's not that engaging. There are moments we can use narrative summary, and I'm going to tell you about that in a second. But I've turned that into a showing, okay? Obviously, it's different when you look at it and read it as opposed to when I'm reading it, but until you read the blog, you can't do that. So the ride home from the party was quiet. No chatting and laughing. No swapping stories about drunk friends, not like we used to. Jake was staring straight ahead, his hands gripped tight onto the wheel. What's wrong? I asked. Nothing, he said, still not looking at me. Are you sure? You're being really weird, I said, and put my hand on his thigh. It normally appeased him, but not tonight. Amber, I saw you flirting with that guy at the bar, and it was pretty bloody embarrassing, he said, flicking the blinker lever forcefully to indicate the turn into our driveway. You didn't talk to me the whole night, but you were laughing with him like old friends when you just met the guy. Then internal dialogue, italics, what guy at the bar? I racked my brain trying to think of someone I'd spoken to who could have made Jake jealous. Then it clicked. You mean the old guy who smelled like cabbage? I said, laughing. He'd been relatively charming for a pensioner, but I'd spent the whole time politely trying to get away. Now, I didn't write the whole scene, and that's the end of what I've written in the blog, but that's like showing. So can you see the difference in that the first one, which was telling, you know what's happening and you can kind of picture it, but it's really, really blah, right? And it's very removed and boring. But as soon as you put in the dialogue and the action, it becomes much more compelling. And you've probably had this argument, right? So you can picture it straight away. That's the power of showing the story. So in creative nonfiction, that's how you write. Your reader is engaged and they're picturing what's happened. It's like they start forming a movie in their head, especially if they're visual like me and maybe like some of you are. You can't help but create the movie in your head, right? And that's how your reader stays engaged. So there are times to use narrative summary, which is more of that journal telling style, when you're moving from one scene to another over a period of maybe hours or months or even years, because you can't show every single thing that happens in your life, and some of it's unnecessary. So if something happened at work and then something happened at home, but you had to drive from one to the other, you wouldn't explain the whole drive unless something happened on the drive. You might just say, I jumped into the car and drove home. When I got there, blah, blah, blah. So you don't have to show everything. You use it with balance. So, ask yourself, how often am I using narrative summary? Am I going whole pages without using it? Am I showing everything? Like, look for the balance and the light and shade in your story. So that's something I always work through with clients, just getting them to balance that out a little bit. Some of the other mistakes that people make is speaking to the reader. So when you're telling a story in first person, so in this like creative nonfiction novel style, never break out of character and speak to the reader like, if I'd known then what I know now, or yes, dear reader, or putting things in brackets, which, look, I'm guilty of with writing in general, but don't do it in your memoir. Don't remind them they're reading a book is something that I always say. Just let them get lost in your story and keep them going through, like keep them pulling them through the book with your structure. Look, doing a structure is an art. Obviously, that's something that as a book coach I specialize in doing. But to try and explain it, something I always like to do is put a bit of a hook at the end of a chapter so that they want to read on. So with my novel, for example, that could have been a memoir, and obviously lots of people will think that it is. And look, it's not. It is inspired by my real life. But I always put something at the end of the chapter where they wanted to keep reading. It's a bit cliffhangery, but not too much. You don't want to overuse that. But people would still write to me. If that book came out 4 years ago, I still get emails all the time saying, oh my God, I couldn't put your book down. I couldn't stop reading. When's the next one coming out? I know I feel really bad that the next one hasn't come out, but I'm too busy coaching people to write their books at the moment. But with your life story, it's the same. You want to strategically position events so that the reader wants to know what happened next. I never want someone to finish reading a chapter and kind of go, okay, I'm done, and put it down. I want them to stay up until their eyes are bleeding, that they can't put it down and they finally have to because they can't even keep their eyes open. So that's to keep that in mind. Oh, the other mistake, I've just written some notes here. The other mistake is don't ever have hindsight or your future self speaking. So if in the story you're 8 years old you're not going to write like an 8-year-old, right? Because that would just be weird. But when you are writing, you can't have the insight or wisdom of a 44-year-old because you are only 8 in that part of the story. So you are telling the story. Tense. We have to talk about tense. I'll write that down to remind myself. You are in the story, you are 8, but you have to find that balance between telling the story as an 8-year-old, but not putting your 44-year-old self on top of it because you don't have that wisdom at that time. So speaking about tense, I forgot to mention past tense versus present tense. Now, most of my clients write in past tense, and when we tell our friends a story, we tell it in past tense. Okay, now that's fine. It's more engaging to write in present tense, but it's really tricky because we never speak in present tense. So it's hard to write that way because your brain kind of struggles with it, right? So I don't force any of my clients. Oh, look, I've only like maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3, I'm trying to think, maybe 2 or 3 at the most clients are writing in present tense, though, of those who are writing a memoir, because it is hard and it's not natural. So don't make a big deal of it, but if you can do it because it is more engaging for the reader. They are like in the story a lot more. The other thing with showing and telling versus telling is concrete versus abstract words. Now, again, all of this is in the blog, so I'm going to chuck the blog link into the comments and you can grab that. So don't worry too much, but I do want to explain it, explain it now. With concrete and abstract words, concrete words are things that are like cold or yellow or gritty. Like they're words you can kind of feel and they mean something. They're standalone words that do have a meaning and you know exactly, right? Abstract words are feelings, things like sad or happy or anxious. They mean different things to different people. They're sort of abstract, kind of high level words. Those are the sorts of things you don't want to use too often because that's a telling word, whereas showing is showing how you would feel anxious or sad. So there was another example. So I'll give you an example of that. I did put one in here. I felt sad. Okay, so here's how you show someone that you're sad, right? I slipped into my room and buried my head in the pillow. I grabbed a picture of my mother off the bedside table, clutched it to my heart and began to sob. That's concrete, right? It's also active rather than passive. You know that she's sad rather than me saying, oh, I'm sad, whatever, rather than me saying, I felt sad. Clearly, you're sad. The same as when you are talking about someone being angry, instead of saying, he was angry at me, if you say he slammed his bag down and stomped out of the room, he's clearly angry. So try not to use those abstract sort of feeling terms because they just don't really add as much to the story as showing how someone is having that emotion. So I think that's the main thing for today. Let me just jump in and see now if I do have any questions and I really hope that this doesn't make the sound double up because that's what happened the other day. I'm going to jump into my page here and see if there are any questions. I'm really sorry. I've only started using OBS Studio the last few weeks. It was fine the first time and it's been kind of shit every time since then because as soon as I open that video, I feel like there's going to be double up in sound. 14 comments, bloody hell. Go away. All right. Good. Oh, look, I have got lots of comments, but you know how Facebook Live does that annoying thing when it makes you watch the whole thing and you only get the comments like as it gets to the time that they were in the video? So annoying. You can DM me if you've got a comment now, hopefully if you're my friend, because I can see that. Bloody, I'm going to sort this out, this comment thing. Okay, if you do have any questions and I haven't seen them, I will jump into the thing later and answer them. As I said, go into my blog. It is about this topic. There's a whole heap of great information. You can also download, I've got a checklist, a 45-step checklist, a book writing and publishing checklist. It's got everything from planning your book through to publishing and promoting it. I do encourage you to get that because it's fabulous. Once you're on my list as well, I'll always send you the blog. I'll send you a link to the Facebook Live. But I do love you joining me. If I've got any questions, as I said, I will answer them. I'm really trying to see them right now. Look, there's me going bloody hell on my video. How funny. Okay, so I really hope that you enjoyed today. If you do want to write your life story and maybe you want some help with it, look, just message me. I'm not a high pressure seller person. I'm like a no pressure person. I want to work with people who are really invested, who are going to make the effort, who are going to put the time in and the care in, who want to learn, who want to be supported, and who want to write a really great story. Obviously, it's not cheap to work with a book coach. You're looking at a few $1,000s. I am launching a group program in June where we'll spend 6 months in a Write Your Book Before Christmas program, and that'll be all of you will be going through it together, and we'll set up accountability buddies and things like that, and that will obviously be a lower cost option. But if you want to get started now and you do want to really seriously do this and have one-on-one feedback from me about your writing, which obviously you won't get in the group program, then do reach out to me. We'll just have a chat. If it's not the right fit, I'll tell you. If I don't think it's a good idea for you to write one, maybe for you to do something else right now, then I will tell you. If you know anything about me, you know that I'll be honest, but in a really loving way, because I want this to be a great experience for both of us. So do reach out to me if you're thinking of doing it, and we can have a chat. If it's not the right fit, we'll part as friends and it will be fine. So message me, click on the link in a second to get the blog, and ask me questions anytime. If you're not in my group already, come join the group, Book Writing for Coaches, Speakers and Entrepreneurs, and I look forward to helping you with your book. And I'll see you soon. Bye.